Hi everyone, this is Sneha and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this episode of Ask Open Source, I'll be talking about 5 non-code contributions that you can make to open source right away. So with Hacktoberfest right around the corner, I think this is the perfect time for people who do not have that much experience with coding on how they can get started with open source without any knowledge of coding. So let's get started. The first non-code contribution that you can make to open source is through documentation. So the question arises, what does this all entail? A lot of people think it's just like the README, but it actually can mean a lot of things. If the organization has a read the docs, then that is something that you can go ahead, check out, and maybe update. If the organization has some PDF files or some doc files attached in the repository, then you can go ahead and check those out and edit them. You can even work towards the issue templates or the pull request templates that are within the organization, edit them. That is like the templates that you see when you open a issue or when you open a pull request. So you can go ahead and raise a pull request to even improve those if you think that it is missing out on some point. But more importantly, the point that you should be focusing on is what kind of changes should you be actually making with the documentation. So I have seen this in Hacktoberfest a lot that sometimes contributors end up making quite unnecessary changes to the documentation, such as changing the words, replacing them with better synonyms. And that I would say is not really a good contribution that you should be making to open source. So just as a rule of thumb, think whether your contribution really adds some value to the repository. If you own the repository, would you have merged that pull request? And judge whether the contribution you're making is something of value to the organization. Some good ways of contributing to the documentation would be if the documentation is outdated. For example, the means of setup that is given in the documentation is not correct. You can raise a pull request to update that. You can raise a pull request to update some typos or changing the structure of some sentences that may be a bit vague or difficult for contributors to understand. You may also raise pull requests to add certain points that you think that the documentation is missing out on, if there's some kind of omission of some sort. So these are all ways that you can add to the documentation, but do not raise redundant pull requests to change the words to better synonyms. That probably won't get your PR merged. The second non-code contribution that you can make to open source is through design. And design, I think personally, opens up a world of possibilities. So it can be related to the branding of the organization, like it includes the logo, it includes the different colors and everything. It can mean the very specific repository, the website or the app. So if you find some UI UX related bugs, or if you see that the button styling is not very consistent, or if you find that the colors used are not in accordance with the color scheme or the color palette that the organization uses. These are all places where you can raise issues and create PRs to modify the design and to make it better. Moving on to the third way that you can contribute to open source through non-code contributions is by onboarding your contributors. And by far, I feel that this is the easiest way that you can break into open source. All it requires for you to do is to be active on the social channels of the organization. So it can be Slack, it can be Twitter, and what you have to do is just help in onboarding the new contributors. So just like you got onboarded onto the organization some time back, you just have to see wherever you find new contributors. There are a lot of new contributors who will be asking new questions. They'll be asking questions about how to set up certain repository, or they may be asking questions about how to find certain issues. And this is where you come in and you can direct them to the places of like the resources, or you can help them find new issues, or you can give them guidance on how they can actually complete the setup of that project on their local system. And this I think again is a really good way for you to get started. And I also want to emphasize that do not think that this is a way that is not a valid contribution because there is no pull request getting merged into the repository. This is also a very valid contribution. It really helps out the open source organizations with onboarding new contributors, and they are actually really on the lookout for people who help out other people in onboarding, who help out other people in starting their journeys with open source. Moving on to the fourth non-code contribution that you can make to open source is by reviewing pull requests. Now this point I feel is not something that is completely without any knowledge of coding. You might require a bit of knowledge of coding, but you can also sail through it without having knowledge of coding, and I'm going to break it down how. So for example, what you have to do is just go to the pull request tab of the organization. You can see different pull requests listed there. You just go to a pull request to see what issue the pull request is trying to solve. All you have to do is check out the changes that the person made through their pull request onto your local system and check if the issue is being solved through those changes. So for example, if I have an issue which says that there's a button and it's sort of overflowing outside of the border, right? And someone raised a pull request for that, and I do not have any knowledge of coding. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead, I'll check out the changes that they made in the pull request on my local system. I will open the page where that button exists, locally, like localhost something. And when I reach that route, I'll just check whether the button is now within the border or not. So this is a way that I can check without actually having knowledge of coding whether this change is actually working or not. Now that being said, the next question arises that what if the code that they have written is not very readable or not very maintainable? So those are things that you don't need to worry about. What you can comment on is that, you know what, I tested out these changes in my local system. I think they work fine. And I also tested them out at different screen sizes. And I think this change works fine. And the maintainers are actually going to go ahead and at least review themselves, like at least 2 approving reviews for most of the organizations that I have worked with before going to merge this. So do not worry if you feel that I am not that proficient in the languages to actually review the pull request. What you can do is just locally check out the changes and comment on those. The fifth and the final way that you can make non-code contributions to open source is by finding and reporting bugs. And this way, I again feel, is relatively easier than the other methods that I've discussed. All you have to do is to locally set up the repository. If it's an app or if it's a web app, all you have to do is to go through different routes in these applications, and you have to just test out different things. These bugs can be related to either the front end or the back end. So if you're talking about the front end, then what you can do is you can test out the screen in different screen sizes. What you can do is you can expand certain elements, UI, UX elements, and see if they are working well. What you can do is, if it's a form, you can deliberately leave out some fields empty and see how it is being processed, if it's giving the right error messages at different points. So these are some ways that you can test it out on for the front end. And for the back end, you can test it out in this way. For example, if there are some counts that are displayed, for example, if it's a number of blocks, and you find that the count is actually wrong, then you can raise an issue for this. And if at some place there's an algorithm that does some computation, you can check out whether the results are computed are right or not manually. So these are all different ways that you can test out the app. There's so many more ways that once you just run the application and you try to interact with it as a normal real user, you'll find so many bugs and so many areas that you think you can improve upon, and you can report these bugs, raise issues for that. You can also even raise feature requests that you think can improve the app. For example, let's say there's a blog and there's a feature for comments. You can raise something like there should be a feature for replying on the comments. There should be a feature for upvoting or reacting to those comments. So these are all feature requests that you can also think of to add on to the application. So now that we're at the end of the video, I also have some honorable mentions on how you can contribute to open source in a non-code way. The first honorable mention is translation. So if you are proficient in some language that the organization is trying to support, then definitely check out how you can add translations onto the repository. So basically, the different phrases that are being used throughout the site in English, they would be required to translate in certain languages such as French or German or Russian or whatever the organization is trying to support. And all you have to do is to just write the translation and get this merged as a pull request. The point number 2 in honorable mentions is by attending the weekly check-ins or the weekly meetings that the organization holds. Now, these are the meetings where they have a really high-level discussion about the agenda or the goals that the organization has for the next couple of weeks. And this is where you can also participate and add your valuable contributions. That's all for this video. If you found this content to be of value, then please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'm just starting out and your support goes a really long way. Thank you. That's all. Bye guys.